Welcome back to Eyewitness News this morning, joined by Charley O'Hara. If you have a legal question or reminder, give us a call. The number is here on your screen, 436-1212, and Charley can answer those questions for you. Charley, we just went over it a moment ago talking about what the Kansas Legislature is attempting to do with regards to changing things about the Supreme Court. Now, it's what they say is they don't want the Supreme Court to be able to usurp, is the word they use, the legislative or judicial branch. What exactly is going on there with what they're trying to do between the Supreme Court and the legislature?
I think it goes back to the old civics or government lesson that we always had about separation of powers doctrine. We have these separation of powers. We have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And it's in the history of the United States and different states, they've gotten arguments before, and they will, somebody thinks the other one's taking advantage of them, and they go back and forth, and it's kind of a continual fight. I don't know what's going to be the result of this, but obviously it's something we want to be very careful with, because that is how our country works. It's the checks and balances of having a different, one branch do something different and the other one puts that branch under control. So that's not an unusual thing. Now, I don't know exactly where they're going and what they want to do this time, but that's what it gets back to, the basic civics. Interesting.
Because right now the Kansas Supreme Court justices are appointed, yes? Or are they?
They are appointed.
They're appointed, and so that's a life term kind of similar to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, it's not really similar because they come up for retention every 6 years, so they can actually be voted out. So it's a different system, and they could be voted out, and that's why that's in there. So if someone thinks they're abusing their power, they can vote them out.
Exactly. Every 6 years, though, they're trying to increase that. Okay, interesting. That's a good point to make right there. We do have a caller on the line with the question. So, hey, caller, if you're there, go ahead now and ask your question to Charley.
Charley, I'm asking if you leave a company, if they have to pay you your vacation time when you leave.
Well, I don't know that. I mean, that's all a contractual situation, and all these things that we would, I mean, as far as employment, I would think if you've earned your vacation time, they would have to pay it. But I would have to check with what agreement you had with that company, because, as I've said, on most things, the contract you have, whether with the employer or something you rent or a lease, that contract controls. So you'd have to look at that contract. But I would think that you should get that money.
And a lot of times there are some people that do vacation differently, your PTO time as it's called. Some earn those hours and use those hours, and some it's just given to you right in a lump.
It all depends on how you agreed to it and what the agreement was.
Exactly. Another thing you just have to look over with contracts too. Really quickly, Charley, with the U.S. Supreme Court, they just had their first 4-4 tie in a decision. Clarify for people what that 4-4 tie actually means.
Well, a 4-4 tie would mean that whatever the lower court, which would, in this instance would be the Circuit Court of Appeals, is what we call them, the one right under the Supreme Court, whatever they ruled, that would control. Whatever went to the Supreme Court, that's no decision, so you go back to the lower court, and what they said controls.
And that's a binding agreement.
That's binding until it comes up again.
Until it comes up again. Again, another important reason why we have an odd number of Supreme Court justices. Looking to get that solved here pretty soon. Thanks for joining us, Charley. Thanks for your phone call, too. We're back here in just a moment.